we've also heard the Labour Party announcement that when they come to power, if they come to power, there'll be no new investment in North Sea oil or gas. And the GMB's Gary Smith and one or two of the unions are beginning to say, whoa, what about our jobs? And consumer groups are asking, if you go on pushing us towards heat pumps and much else, who can pick up the tab? And I just wonder whether this whole headlong commitment to net zero is something that perhaps Sir Keir Starmer might reconsider. Well, joining me is Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at the University Research Institute and a former advisor to Gordon Brown when he was Prime Minister. And I think it's right, Michael, you were very much around at the time of the 2008 Climate Change Act.
Indeed, I was. Nice to be on your programme.
Very good to have you. Look, we all want a clean, green, good environment to live in. There's no question about that. But do you see the point I'm making, that when the GMB speak up as volubly as they have about the potential loss of jobs in the North Sea, and when consumers start to get scared, not just about the amount of subsidy already on their electricity bills, but the idea of heat pumps, which in an older house it's going to be £8,000-10,000. And I just wonder whether the sort of Ed Miliband school of what we ought to do about climate change, whether that perhaps is rather more at home in Islington, in North London, than it is in the red wall seats that Labour needs to win back at the next election.
Well, there's polling on that, actually, which shows that people in the Red Wall and people all over the country worry about climate change. People have children and they worry about the kind of world that we're leaving for our children. And so the worry about climate change is universal across the country. And it isn't just Ed Miliband, of course, that has the desire to go to net zero. It is the government which has committed legally to go to net zero. The whole of the Labour Party is behind the net zero policy. So is the Conservative Party. So are all the other parties. And so is every country in the world. What's interesting about this is that there is this extraordinary consensus that the impacts that we're now having on the climate are so serious that every country is now committed to getting to net zero. So this isn't a partisan thing. This is something that pretty much everybody in the country wants to do, and which all countries are now trying to do because of the urgency of the situation.
Yeah, and there was a consensus, actually, everywhere apart from Sweden and the state of Florida, maybe Texas, that locking down was the only way to deal with coronavirus, and that turned out not to be right. I mean, when you say, there's huge support for climate change policies, well, not when you tell people what it's actually going to cost them, and not when you explain to people.
The cost is coming from fossil fuels. The reason we have record energy bills and people are under such pressure from the cost of living crisis is because of fossil fuel prices. It's because gas and oil prices have risen so much. And so the attempt to take us away from gas and oil, to reduce our dependence on those fossil fuels, is not only good for climate change, it's essential for climate change, but it's also going to be good for our bills. So I find this really an extraordinary argument.
Well, hang on a second.
In some way, you cannot want the high prices. Let me finish. You cannot want the high prices, but then you also think that it's really important that we have more oil and gas. It's the oil and gas prices which are causing the terrible inflation and cost of living crisis that we have now.
The price of gas is now lower than it was before Putin invaded Ukraine. Yes, commodity prices can be volatile. I get that. I understand that fully. But let's face it, wind energy has over the last couple of decades cost every household a great deal of money. And because of this consensus that you talk about, between Labour, the Conservatives, Uncle Tom Cobley and all, people hadn't realised that they were spending an extra 20-25% on their bills to subsidise wind energy. The point, Michael, I'm making is this.
The figure is 8%, so less than a tenth of your energy bill. And of course, now it's been taken away from your energy bill. So in fact, your energy bill doesn't have any green levies on it. That's now being paid for by general taxation. But it was less than 10%. And of course, your energy bill has more than doubled because of the rising prices of fossil fuels.
Well, we'll agree.
Would it be better
we'll agree to disagree on that.
Undergo these extraordinary energy price volatility and price rises, or renewables, which are reliable and cheap? Then I think most people will say, let's go for the renewables. And then we get a safe climate too.
Michael, renewables are not cheap. They can't survive without subsidy. But you and I would disagree on that. And yes, for the moment, they've taken the subsidies off, but they're going to go back on. But here's my point.
And they are getting cheaper.
Here's my
They're
point.
being installed everywhere around the world.
Here's my point. If Labour want to win back those red wall seats, if they're going to carry on with current government policy to get rid, for example, of gas boilers and replace them with very expensive heat pumps, if they're serious about us having very expensive and perhaps unreliable electric cars after 2030, they will struggle with those policies to win back those red wall seats. Do you think?
Well, I don't agree with that. No, I don't agree with that, because what Labour wants to do is to spend money on green technologies all around the country. So, for example, the biggest element of the 28 billion a year spending pledge is in energy efficiency, which is making homes properly fit to live in and not drafty and cold. That will save people's bills. You pay much less energy, obviously, if your home is well insulated. It will also reduce our energy demand, which means that we don't have to pay so much on our energy bills as a country. And it will, of course, make us more secure. Now, those things will create jobs in everywhere where there is a house. So every constituency in the country is likely to benefit from that policy. And I think red wall voters will look at this and say, this is what we want. We want jobs in our areas, and here is a way of creating jobs.
But we'll still be importing oil, coal and gas for the next 20 years, won't we?
Yes, absolutely we will. And we will still be producing it. So the Labour Party's commitment now, which is not to have any expansion of oil and gas production in the North Sea, doesn't mean that we won't continue to produce it. They haven't said we're going to close down the oil fields. They've just said we don't want to expand them. So there will still be another 20 to 25 years of oil and gas coming out of the North Sea. And of course, most of that actually is exported. We don't actually use very much of our own.
This is Michael, this is nonsense. This is the Labour Party,
which has been very widely supported. The GMB, representing their workers, quite understandly doesn't like it. But 150 organisations nearly this week supported that policy, including organisations like the Women's Institute.
Well, it is completely and utterly mad, because when a well runs dry,
concern about climate change.
When a well runs dry, you have to drill another one. So the idea of what we're pumping at the moment...
They're not running dry. We've got 25 years' worth of oil and gas.
Michael, I don't believe a word of it.
And in
we will agree.
Time, we have to be at net zero. So
we will agree to disagree.
Oil and gas.
We'll agree to disagree, but it's good to have you on, and it's good to see that those of us that are slightly sceptical are dealing with a religion. And it's a religion that has taken over the experts,
and
funded by tens of billions of taxpayers' money.
I'm not a religious person. I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the scientific facts, which are given by 99.9% of all climate scientists.
Right, there we are.
And this is why every country in the world is doing it.
Yeah, no, just like lockdown. Just like lockdown, if the experts say it's right...
But there was much more disagreement about whether or not, I mean, I don't have a view on that, but there was a much more disagreement amongst scientists about lockdown. Mostly in hindsight, I have to say, mostly it's people looking backwards and saying it might not have been as good a thing as we thought at the time. The majority of scientists at the time thought it was good. But climate scientists, there isn't that disagreement. There is almost universal.
Right. Well, they must be right then.
We have to cut emissions very radically, very quickly. And that's why the Labour Party is committed to doing that.
Fair enough. Michael, thank you.